Good morning. Thanks for listening to this March 20th Thursday weather update. I'm Matt Reardon. I'm starting here with the satellite loop. This started as of yesterday. I'm going to have this play all the way through tonight here. And it's going to end, as the recording of this video, about 5 a.m. Central Time. I'm going to restart it here quickly, and I want to point your attention to this kind of hot pink color here when I start. I'll even draw it out to make it more clear. If you look under the cloud field in northern Illinois, you'll see this brighter pink color here. Now, I understand that most of the color on this map is some form of pink or red, but I'm talking about this color here. You can see it in West Texas, you can see it in northeast Mexico here, and southern part of Texas, and you can see it peeking through in northern Illinois underneath these kind of more proper red colored clouds here. That is the dust, and we've been talking about it yesterday. On Wednesday, we talked about it. On Friday and Saturday, this was pulled up into the Midwest. And the reason we're talking about it is two things. One, we've had this pattern that has produced two now powerful low pressure systems. You can see one kind of right here over my mouse cursor. That came through yesterday. And this is happening with, pronounced dryness here across parts of the southern plains and the high plains of West Texas, eastern New Mexico, and parts of Mexico as well. So I'm going to play this loop again, and we can actually kind of keep an eye on that dust here. And if you look closely, that hot pink color here, it actually makes its way again up into Michigan, similar to the system we saw over the weekend. You can see it stretching through the Ohio River Valley here, and really, again, makes its way from New Mexico, West Texas, Lubbock, all the way up into Quebec, Canada. Who knows how far it's going to go? It's still on its way northeast as of this morning. So, maybe a 1,000-mile journey for the dust here. It got into the rain. It got into the snow. We saw a lot of thunder snow or lightning during a snow event in parts of western and northwest Iowa. Remember an event like this from a few years ago. Some research came out that the dust might actually help produce some of that thunder snow. And we saw dirty rain in parts of Illinois and Indiana as those thunderstorms came through. People's cars sending in pictures of the dust accumulating on the windshield after some of that rain evaporated. So it's indicative of two things. One, this pattern has been progressive. We've had a lot of storm systems to talk about, red flag warnings. We had blizzard conditions on the plains, but that dust is being sourced from somewhere else. It's being sourced from the southern plains. You can still see it being blown around here in Texas, and it's a concern for dryness here. I thought Eric did a great job yesterday comparing what we're seeing this year to 2012. I'm going to follow along with that and compare it to a very nearby year of 2011. So if you stick around kind of in the middle part of this video, we'll compare where we're at in 2025 with 2011. It's kind of a different drought scenario where we're focused more on the southern plains, a bit over into the southeast versus up into the northern plains, or perhaps the Corn Belt or the I-states and north. Showing you some more just fascinating satellite imagery as these low pressure systems come in. Again, this one below 990 millibars. You can see it coming on screen here, the center of that spin. And to the east, this was our area of focus for severe weather yesterday. So we had thunderstorms come through Illinois, a few tornado reports north of Bloomington near Peoria, wind reports stretching down through the Wabash Valley and then over into western Indiana as well. And then jumping over again, the dust that was coming through, the hazy sky that we saw across the Midwest, we talked about the thunder snow, wasn't coming from Iowa or Illinois or Missouri or Arkansas even. This was being sourced all the way over from New Mexico, in some cases northern Mexico, which is on the screen here, in West Texas. And this was on early Wednesday. And you can see, actually, this was all the way from Tuesday as the storm system came over. So I see the date there, and you can see the dust being picked up, which was going to make its journey now 2 days later on its way into Canada there. It's just fascinating to see it just getting started. A bit of broader view here, much lower resolution than the slide before, but it still shows you the extent. And this is true color. So this is what was flowing up over our heads across the central part of the country yesterday. Again, bringing that hazy orange yellow hue to the sky just didn't feel right outside for folks across the central U.S. yesterday. And then you kind of added the tornado watches on top of that. And it was indicative of, again, we have a powerful pattern, this progressive pattern that we've been watching, again, over the last 7, 14, 21 days with a big low pressure system. It seems like just scheduled to talk about at some part of the week. I think that pattern's dying down here, but we'll have to talk about the exact specifics of it as I go through the next few slides. If we have the last 24 hours of precipitation, this updated as of this morning. I'll see if we can get the 5 a.m. update here. And what we really see on the backside of that system as it came through, these were the blizzard-like snowfall accumulations that we saw on the backside of this. Parts of eastern Nebraska, very high winds, struggling conditions in terms of just whiteout high winds and accumulating snowfall for parts of central and eastern Nebraska. There saw some impressive pictures coming out, parts of Kansas included in that as well. I mentioned this thunder snow in northwest Iowa. We can see we're quite maximum there where we saw that. And then over into Illinois, Indiana, and then down south through the middle Mississippi River Valley and the Ohio River Valley. So we saw these streaky thunderstorms with a few severe reports on these as well. I think the day didn't overperform in a severe weather fashion. We did see quite a number of reports, but it wasn't this kind of widespread large event. Certainly like what we saw on Friday, Saturday, or even Sunday, the multi-day severe weather outbreak that we saw over the weekend. If we just look at the Storm Prediction Center reports, this is valid as of yesterday. So 319 Wednesday. Again, those tornado reports kind of centered around the Peoria to Bloomington corridor there. Wind reports east of there up through parts of the Chicago metro area and then down into Kentucky and a few in Tennessee as well. This video is taken from the Nebraska State Patrol. Again, central and eastern Nebraska. This is the conditions they were dealing with. At this point, it's life-threatening, shutting down some interstates, not a road you'd want to be on late at night. And then even as of this morning, as we're kind of waking up here, I'll see if I can update this again as about 5 a.m. Central. Still 50,000 customers without power as of this morning. This number was almost double, if not more than that, as we went to bed last night. So good news is that power is being restored, but for a number of folks here in the eastern municipalities still without power as of this morning. I'm hoping, just based on the trends overnight, that that's quickly going to be resolved here today. So I'm thankful to the line crews getting out there. If we look over the last 10 days precipitation, this does not include that recent system we have, so that's why it's missing that snow swap. But what I'll stress is if you just compare that last 24 hours of precip that we just looked at with the precipitation kind of in the mid part of the country, not seeing as much in the southern plains, and we jump over and look at the last 10 days, really kind of the northern plains and the southern plains devoid of significant accumulating precipitation. Now there's holes in here. We'll have to keep an eye on these as they develop. Even South Florida, we saw some wildfire concerns, like grass fire way down here south of Homestead, Florida. So these are the areas we're missing out on the precip, and we're going to have to watch these as we go through that, again, that spring predictability window, where we come out on the other side in terms of who's dry, who's wetter than average. It's going to play a role when we think about the forecast for drought into the growing season. And so as these kind of areas of local minimum develop, again, our focus is going to increase, and the scrutiny, at least comparing this here to some previous drought years. So Eric covered 2012 yesterday. I'm going to get into 2011 in just a second. Before I do that, storm system that we talked about, it's moving a little bit slower, so it's finally departing out of the kind of the central U.S., heading over to the eastern U.S. If we look at the radar, valid as of this morning, can see snow showers now over Chicago, even parts of central Illinois. That's moving into Indiana here this morning with some wintry mix further toward the south across the state. See that line of showers moving up through Ohio, parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, a very thin line of showers and storms potentially stretching into parts of Georgia and Alabama here. This is going to be making its way east across the mid-Atlantic and then the Carolinas today. A chance for showers and storms here across the Carolinas, but not expecting kind of a big severe weather day as this event exits east. This one, unlike the storm system that we saw come through parts of Pennsylvania and New York on Sunday. This one will be more tamer. It's been weaker overall in the severe thunderstorm department, and we're thankful for that, given that folks are still cleaning up after the multi-day event over the weekend. Quickly jump ahead and look at the all hazards map from NOAA as of this morning. Some lingering red flag warnings, even some across the Gulf Coast states and then down into southern Florida. I mentioned a lot of that rain we've seen across the southeast has skipped the southern third of the state of Florida. Really kind of the southeast as a whole has been at times dodging dry weather concerns this year. Again, 2-3 weeks without precipitation, not as much to write home about, maybe in parts of the central U.S., but 2 to 3 weeks in the southeast, and we're quickly talking about a flash drought. So that's why we can see it kind of pick up and then wane, pick up at a higher frequency than maybe what we're used to over in some of the central and western states of the U.S. See the freeze warnings here and advisories for parts of the southeast here. If we just jump over and look at minimum temperatures, I'll make this valid for Friday morning. This is the National Weather Service minimum overnight temperature forecast going into Friday morning, and you can see those 32, 30 near Huntsville, up in Alabama and parts of western Georgia, and that's kind of that area of freeze and frost concern highlighted by those national weather advisories. Now, if we just kind of jump back, look broadly here, we can see a winter weather advisory still valid for north central Illinois. That's on the backside of the system with that snow coming through. Some wind advisories surrounding that as the system departs east today. We mentioned the red flag warnings, some winter storm warnings up for the Cascades, but largely just kind of looking across all the states here, not a tremendous amount of weather that we're concerned about here today. I think we're in a bit of a lull as we go through the next 6, 7, I'd argue maybe even 10 days into the forecast. And because of that, I'll take this time again. I want to take a closer look at 2011 here, because if I look at the forecast now, if I think about the flow pattern that we've been dealing with, if you just think about the hazards that we've been talking about, whether it was this week, last week, or even the weeks before, we've been talking about red flag warnings emanating out of the southern plains. We've been talking about dust, dirty rainfall, thunder snow potentially as a result of that. We're talking about interstates being shut down due to blizzards and then dust storms in the very same day. And these are happening for two reasons. One, the pattern is coming through quickly. It's bringing up these systems as they exit the continental divide. And then secondly, it's taking the source region of that drought and it's showing it to the rest of us across the central U.S. So it's quite literally putting it in our faces, the dust that has been developing across parts of Texas and New Mexico, and then the winds associated with that. And it really makes me think about some of our the major dryness from the past, and the most recent one is 2011. So I bring it up. I'm going to jump to the end of that summer, August 9th, 2011. We saw the drought really persist through spring. We went through that spring predictability window across the southern plains without significant accumulations. We saw at times severe weather sneak back in to the southern plains, Arkansas, parts of Texas, Oklahoma at times over toward the Dallas to Oklahoma City line. And then, of course, the southeast with the huge outbreak in April of 2011. But we never got significant or frequent enough rainfall into the southern plains to break the drought as we got into summer. And as we know, once that drought is established after that spring predictability window, it gets that much harder to bring flow up into there. At that point, you're almost rooting for a tropical system to meander or develop out of the Gulf to bring drought relief. And that's not a good place to be in, right? If I jump over and look at the June to August temperature and precipitation anomalies, we'll start with precipitation. Not a surprise. We just looked at the drought monitor map valid as of August with a wide swath of extreme drought over portions of the southern plains. It makes sense from June to August that we never broke that trend with low precipitation. Where did we see precipitation? This is something we talked about on Tuesday. So across parts of the northern plains, at times into the Midwest, and over into the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. We talked about the severe weather reports from 2011, what those might tell us in the story as kind of a reflection of where we're at in 2025. If we just look at June, across the southern plains, again, not a lot of activity. A few smattering of reports, some hail here in Oklahoma, tornado reports, some surrounding hail in the Dallas metro, but nothing frequent and significant in terms of getting that rainfall budget back into the area. Again, you can almost see the high pressure system. Maybe put it here over the Ark-La-Tex corridor here of those three states, and you can just see the thunderstorms flowing around it, those ridge riding thunderstorms, if you will, flowing through parts of the central U.S. and then over toward the Carolinas. If I take this out to July, that high pressure system got even more dominant, stretching arguably from Texas all the way over toward the southeast, maybe even Florida. And those thunderstorms, again, they're just going to follow around the periphery of that high pressure system. We watch that every year. And as that gets more established and dominant as it did in 2011, thunderstorms are just going to follow that around. That's why all this tornado activity is up here in North Dakota, central or even northern Minnesota, up by Fargo. And while we do see a severe weather season shift north throughout the year, this was doing it in an extreme fashion. It wasn't even until August that we started to sneak some severe weather back toward some areas that we'd call the southern and high plains here. So I think about the June to August temperature pattern. Again, it lines up exactly, and this is what you'd expect, this continental drought. And what I mean by that is you're far away from the Atlantic, you're far away from the Pacific, this continental feedback where as you dry out the vegetation, as you dry out the soils in the central U.S., you tend to bring the sun in because you have less cloud cover, less moisture to produce clouds, and you get hotter. Well, as you get hotter, you dry out more vegetation, you desiccate more of the soils, and you just kind of get into this feedback cycle where the drought feeds on itself in the form of these hot temperature. So whenever we see this kind of drought turn into a heat wave in the southern plains, our concern increases for persistent drought. If you think about the jet stream level flow, again, over that summer of 2011, two things here. One, large ridge over the North Pacific, diving down into something of a trough here across the western U.S., and then we can see it flowing up and over the plains here. And that's expected given the severe weather reports that we just looked at, right? So with the jet stream flowing over that, riding over that high pressure system, providing the fuel, right, for the tornado reports, the wind shear, and the hail that we saw across Minnesota, across parts of the Dakotas. If we compare the sea surface temperatures, there are similarities, but there's certainly not a fingerprint match at this point. And that's good news in some ways. And I would say we'll watch this as we go into April, as we get into May here. But comparing them here today, this is valid as of March 18th this week. We talked about this kind of negative PMM pattern here stretching from Cabo, our waning La Nina very quickly weakening here, almost stretching over toward the western Pacific here. We've talked at times about this El Nino Costero, or this El Nino that's starting over here in the eastern Pacific. It's not in the middle of the tropical Pacific net. We're not in an El Nino, but if one were to develop, this is how it would look early on. So this is something we're going to have to keep an eye on as we go into 2025 here. Some of the long-range kind of oceanic models that we follow aren't as bullish on this El Nino extending into the central Pacific. Some even have chances near the end of the year of La Nina returning, which we'll have to talk about as we go into summer here. But nonetheless, this is the pattern we're seeing now. If we look into the Gulf of Alaska or west to Canada here, this is an area we look at times because it has a correlation with southern plains and high plains drought. When this water temperature here turns colder, we tend to increase drought risks here. And right now it's a wash. If anything, you could argue the temperatures here, given the yellow color there, South Alaska, are a little bit warmer than normal. If we compare 2011, it looks quite different, right? The water temperature South of Alaska and West Canada, very cold. We have that same negative PMM pattern stretching from Cabo to La Nina there, but the magnitude is greater. And then just kind of south towards South America, you can see the stretch of cooler waters here. And what I would say is the shape here is perhaps on line. And what I mean by that is the general shape of the cooler waters. We kind of drew the line here. There's some cooler water stretching here. We can see that little bit of cooler neutral water there. The shape is similar. The magnitude is very different. And what I mean by that is just colder in 2011, that same shape that I just drew out. I think that's good news in terms of not comparing this here wholesale to 2011, but that shape concerns me. Because if you just compare, global anomalies today, what I mean by that, instead of comparing temperatures to the past in terms of where the ocean are now, but if you compare them to where they are at the rest of the globe, the pattern here that we're dealing with in March of 25 looks more, like what we were seeing in 2011, at least using that comparison. It's not one-to-one, but it's enough to have me say, okay, well, the sea surface temperatures aren't exactly the same, but that shape isn't enough to be concerning right now. And I say that because if we go back and look at the jet stream anomalies from earlier in spring, March to April of 2011, this is where we're seeing the jet stream faster than average, and these orange and yellow colors here, and then weaker than average in the blue colors. And what we saw is a very intense extended Pacific jet stream riding into the western U.S., bringing tremendous snow to California, parts of Oregon, and the interior west, and then quickly riding up into the Midwest, bringing additional precipitation to parts of the Midwest and the Northeast, and even parts of the Southeast at times in spring. Where were we devoid of that flow? Well, over the South, and eventually over the southern plains, which built in that dryness over the spring. Folks in the western U.S., California, Sierra Nevada, the Cascades, they all remember 2011. This was their banner year for snowfall in the recent kind of last 20 to 30 years. They were, in some cases, 200 to 300% above average for their snowpack. This likely played a role, an influence in the very active severe weather season we had. We've talked about this in the past, how when you get snowpack in here in spring, you get drought across the southern plains. You can even see a reflection of that in the far southern Rockies here. Those two ingredients can help fuel severe weather outbreaks further east, and unfortunately we saw that in a huge way in 2011. And if you think about some of the things that we've been talking about just this year, we've been talking about severe weather pickup. We just saw that multi-day outbreak centered more on the Midwest and the Southeast than Tornado Alley. And if that continues to be the case, if we continue to see a very, very active severe weather season in 25, similar to 2011, and it's bias to the Midwest or it's bias to the Southeast, my concern is going to increase for more of that 2011 analog. February to April precipitation anomalies, spring, kind of late spring, or I should say late winter, early spring, again, dry across the southern parts of the U.S., even extending at times over into the southeast, the southern tip of Florida, wet across the Ohio Valley in the mid-Atlantic. And again, right, the concern here is this does sound a little bit familiar, including that wetness over in the northwest. If we look at the last 60 days of precipitation just this year, in 2025, well, there's that Ohio Valley signal. There's the lack of rainfall across parts of the southern plains. We even have that southern tip of Florida. I don't think that's too significant, but it just does overlap. And then the northwest, you see the increased precipitation there. There's enough here to have me concerned. February to April 2011 in terms of temperature anomalies, well, warm across the south, warm across the southeast, a little bit cooler and much cooler up in Montana, or at least that northern third of the country. If we compare that to what we've seen just since February to now, so February to March 18th of this year, we've been warmer across the south, not significantly so, but certainly warmer over into the southeast. Some of that warmth at times extending up into the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, and then over toward the southwest. But we have been cooler in the parts of the northwest, parts of Montana, and the northern plains here. So not an exact match, but again, the shape, where we're warm south, cool northwest, is still similar. The magnitude's different, but the shape is similar. Well, where are we going? And are we going to continue to track maybe on that 2011 analog? We'll see, right? We can't forecast April and May wholesale yet. It's going to be something we'll have to watch. We just mentioned that severe weather pattern that we're going to have to keep an eye on. Now, May of 2011, I mentioned at times we got severe weather back over toward Dallas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, at times even over into the central plains. But largely as a whole, even the southeast and then the southern plains, over into parts of Kansas included, stayed dry on a broad scale geographically, enough for that drought to override that spring predictability barrier, get into summer where it really magnified in a big way. Temperature anomalies stayed cool west. That is, again, a product of all that snowpack out there. We actually were a bit cooler in the middle part of the country, went warm over into the northeast, but we stayed warm over the kind of the main central anchor of that drought. If I jump forward in the jet stream forecast this year, so I'm showing you the forecast for March 21st. This is valid as of tomorrow on Friday. And the reason I'm showing that is, well, here's that jet stream out of the Pacific, funneling into the western U.S., diving down into the central U.S. before breaking down into a trough here across the Midwest. And again, this pattern, while the magnitude, while we're not seeing 300% of snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas, we have been more active. We saw a miracle March in 2011. We saw a miracle March activity and fingerprints this year. Right? In these videos, we've been talking about how California thankfully had this new snow chances and increased snowpack across the parts of the Sierra Nevadas this year. So again, the shape is similar, the magnitude is different. We're seeing that pattern continue. If I take this jet stream forecast into the future, continue to see these low pressure systems come in a little bit on the weaker side. We don't see this big kind of news-making low pressure system into the forecast next week. What we do see is ridging out west. So Wednesday, March 26th, midweek next week, we see a pretty dominant upper level ridge here coming down into a trough across the eastern U.S. And this is going to define the next work week in terms of what we're dealing with. So warmer temperatures out west, drier conditions there, cooler, a little bit wetter in parts of the Midwest and the Northeast, but more so just this temperature differential between the two. The good news, the little sprinkling of good news I'll put in here for the southern plains, is the ridge out west is actually so dominant that it might allow, and we see this sometimes, it's almost so magnified, it might allow one of these low pressure systems to sneak through one of these upper level lows to get into northern Mexico, where it could spin up into Texas here. We'll talk about that in just a second. If we look at the ECMWF ensemble, their 10-day precipitation anomalies. I showed this same map earlier. Wet in the Pacific Northwest over the next 10 days out toward next weekend. Wet in parts of the upper Midwest with some activity coming through the northern plains as well. Largely dry across the central part of the country, portions of the southern plains, portions of the southeast. Again, close enough to have that kind of 2011 concern. But I mentioned that potential for that upper level low to sneak through. We're going to be watching that. I'd love for that to sneak further up into parts of Texas, West Texas, over eastern New Mexico, to quell down some of the dust and challenges from that, just in visibility alone. If we look further out into the forecast, kind of the end of March into the first week of April for temperatures, those temperature anomalies, again, warm across the south, warm across the southeast. Before this arrives, we'll see the warmth develop out west underneath that dominant ridge there. But I'm showing this because, again, it's a little bit similar to the analogs in 2011, or at least in spring, February, March, April, we saw this warmth across the southeast. Let's take the precipitation forecast here. We mentioned that ridge that's going to be developing out west. I'll make this valid here. So let's do 7 a.m. Thursday morning near the recording of this video. We talked about the snow moving through north central Illinois and Indiana. That system exiting to the east today with some showers and thunderstorms potentially in the mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas here. Showers north of that as that exits the area as we get into very early Saturday morning. We'll see another low pressure system develop over the northern plains and the upper Midwest here as we go into the day Sunday. This is March 23rd now. We're at breakfast time on Sunday for those areas, Illinois, parts of Missouri, rain showers there. As this gets into the portions of the middle and then southern Mississippi River Valley on Sunday, we are watching the potential for this line of thunderstorms to develop all the way back along the front here to East Texas. And this will be an area of concern because there's going to be more instability or more fuel for those thunderstorms as this system comes through. The shear is a little bit in question, so it's kind of the opposite of the situation we were dealing with yesterday where we had plenty of shear, plenty of organization, but a lack of that fuel. I think as we get into Sunday here, we're going to have thunderstorms here to talk about. It's a matter of how severe they'll be. It's enough of a concern here for the Storm Prediction Center to highlight a 15% risk area. We'll have to watch this in the coming days, but keep an eye on the weather here on Sunday afternoon for some severe weather across portions of the southern Mississippi River Valley. If we just look at the height pattern over the next few days, we'll kind of see there's that weak system coming through Friday that we talked about as we got into Saturday and Sunday. Another one of the systems here, that was the one prompting that severe weather concern, just a little bit stronger than the one before it. That system will come through, but there's that ridge quickly developing behind it. If I take you back to the precipitation forecast here, that got us through Sunday, but as we get onto the next work week, very weak system coming through, perhaps some showers here through the Ohio River Valley, maybe some thunderstorms across the southeast on Wednesday, Tuesday to Wednesday of next week. After that, pretty calm through the end of the work week here with that ridge out west. We're really kind of waiting to next weekend before we see something of a breakdown in that ridge. In fact, that ridge is going to try to move across the country toward the east, potentially bringing a better weekend next weekend to folks across the central and eastern part of the country after what's going to be a cooler work week. But I'm keeping my eye down here because that ridge was so strong early in the week, it allowed one of these cutoff lows to sneak underneath it and bring precipitation chances back to at least the southern portions of Texas, portions of potentially the Houston metro area as well. This forecast from the ECMWF taking us all the way out to next weekend where we have perhaps another system to talk about. I'll show you the forecast from the GFS here just to kind of compare the two. Largely similar. There's that weak system that we talked about Friday into Saturday, even weaker on the GFS. That next low pressure system developing again Sunday afternoon across portions of the Midwest. And there would be that attendant severe weather risk across portions of the central and southern Mississippi Valley, perhaps some snow in the upper Midwest here as the system comes through. Again, pretty quiet outside of that. There's that potential system Tuesday and Wednesday trying to get into the southeast, but the GFS keeps it further north. In terms of precipitation, my focus is back on west and southern Texas as that system, the GFS at least Thursday to Friday, brings that rain a little bit further north. So we'll be watching how those two models compete going through the weekend here to see if we can get some of this precipitation into portions of Texas here. Again, we have to go out to the whole of next weekend to have more systems to talk about with the GFS. I won't take it much further than that. If we look at the 8 to 14 day precipitation anomaly from the GFS, again, bringing more of that activity into the state of Texas here as that upper level low sneaks through. Otherwise, this pattern of wholesale looks, again, similar to that concerning shape here with activity in the northwest, activity in the Midwest, but leaving portions of the central plains, southern plains, portions of the southwest, and the southeast dry. We'll have to keep an eye on that Florida dry concern as well, given some of the wildfires there. Look at the 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook from NOAA, again highlighting southern Texas, and that question of how far north is that precipitation going to go is kind of reflected well in those contours, I think. If we look at maximum temperature forecasts, this is valid as a Tuesday, March 25th, kind of picked a day in the middle of the work week to give you an example of the warm west, cool east pattern that we'll see for much of the next work week with high temperatures into the 80s in the Central Valley of California, but down as low as the mid to low 40s in portions of the eastern Corn Belt. Overnight temperatures cooler than that in portions of the Midwest, down in toward that freezing line or perhaps below it for portions of Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa. Out west, California, those low temperatures warmer, less freeze concerns. As we keep thinking about this long-range forecast into April, right, we saw those precipitation chances in southern Texas. We're going to need more of those as we get through spring to help break that drought concern, to help break that analog that I've posed for 2011. And the weeklies, at least this extended forecast from the ECMWF, hasn't shown a huge trend away from that. We have seen near the end of April some moisture trying to get back into central and eastern Texas, and these runs have been consistent with that. Now, is this going to be brief severe weather starting to inch back west like we saw in 2011? That quickly gives back toward drought as we get into May and June. We'll have to keep an eye on that. It is something. Perhaps, at times it's going to be these cutoff lows that sneak through. That would be friendly for southern and eastern Texas, but maybe not for areas like Lubbock or over toward eastern New Mexico. We also have to keep an eye on this positive precipitation signal here, at least versus normal for portions of the Corn Belt. As we get into April and May, and I see signals like this, I start getting concerned for additional severe weather. We just saw on Friday a number of severe reports across Illinois, portions of Kentucky, Missouri, etc. And then just yesterday, additional, not as many, but if that pattern continues through April, we're going to have a lot more of these systems, more overnight systems, more tornado threats, hail, wind to talk about and to work through here. We have temperature forecast over that same time period, same model, again, through much of April. This is March 28th to April 28th anomalies. Very warm over the southern plains, again, consistent with that lack of precipitation there outside of far southern or southeastern Texas. Cooler across the eastern U.S., but not significantly so. Again, that forecast showing more of that warmth anchored across the middle part of the country. I'll end back kind of where we started, that 2011 analog here we'll be watching. This area of the North Pacific, I actually picked a date here right in the middle of the summer here, so July 10th, 2011. We saw this kind of critical negative PDO signature with very warm temperatures north of Hawaii, cooler temperatures in the Gulf of Alaska, stretching all the way down toward that weak La Nina and the Central Pacific. You can see that kind of cool signature here over toward South America. We did even see in 2011, getting into summer, some of that early kind of El Nino activity. This never came to fruition either. So we went through 2011 and then into 2012 that winter. La Nina came back in a big way, and that helped produce the drought of 2012. So I mentioned at the beginning of this that while we're seeing this year, if I jump over and show you this year's anomalies, that warmth developing in the eastern Pacific, it looks like the beginnings, to my eye, of a potential El Nino developing. But in 2011, it didn't develop when we saw that same signal. And so, again, there's enough similarities to have me concerned, at least as 2011 as an analog. We'll see. We're still in that spring predictability window. We've seen hints of that moisture trying to return on the weeklies. We even see this cutoff low that we'll be talking about Thursday and Friday of next week, bringing rain back to Texas. There's time to get through it. We'll have to watch where those severe weather concerns are. You could see the Weather Channel out in Lubbock, Texas a month from now with heavy precipitation amounts moving into portions of western or central Oklahoma as well. So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. Eric will be back with you. As for today, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next week.